Welcome to Dear Asian Australians. This is our second edition of Dear Asian Australians. We are pivoting just ever so slightly on the show name and the show theme to welcome yet another amazing guest from down under. And again, the Australians are living in the future. It is Saturday morning over there, or Friday morning over there, excuse me, while us Americans are stuck a day behind. And perhaps that is a metaphor for how our government is handling this mess. So wherever you are, maybe listening, whenever you may be listening to this, we wish you all the health, the safety, and happiness as we navigate these challenging times together. Excited to really excited to have Kerry Kang on the show today. Kerry is another one of the co-founders of the group that we all love, and a group that has brought us so much belonging, community, and laughter through the community that he and his friends created at Subtle Asian Traits. Kerry's unique in one of the co-founders that he and his sister both are co-founders, and he's a friend of Anne's. Anne's been on the show before, and we are really lucky to get Kerry here and to share with us from his perspective and to hear his life story of the life of Kerry, the Chinese Australian. So, Kerry, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks for making time. It is an interesting time to be alive. It is a fascinating
Yeah,
time, I think, for
definitely.
those of you who are in the student population. At least you have the benefit of just studying and not worrying about getting a job or anything like that quite yet. But
Exactly.
I think the viewpoint of all the things that we're seeing in the world, um, what we need more of is positivity. What we need more is just sometimes a break from reality, a break from all the unfortunate and scary news that we see in terms of the public health crises, the hate crimes, the racism, and of course all the hospitalizations and the unfortunate deaths that come from COVID-19. But we sometimes go to Facebook to find community. We sometimes go to Facebook to find humor and laughter and belonging. And whether I'm pretty sure you didn't think to be the beacon of light and a beacon of hope and happiness at a global level for so many people around the world to the tunes of millions. But it is a group that you and your friends have started. And so we're going to talk about subtle Asian traits, get your story on how it all was started. But first, we want to learn a little bit more about Kerry and the Kang family. Um, Share with us, how did the Kang family move to Melbourne, and tell us a little bit about growing up Chinese Australian.
Sure. So my both of my parents are Chinese and they're from the same province. So before they moved, so they both wanted to move to Australia for like a new opportunity because they saw that um, Australia was such a place where they could start a new life, have a new opportunity, and really just like grow from there. So although they came from the same province, so the province is in Xiamen, which is like right next to Taiwan. So we speak a dialect of Taiwanese.
Mm.
Um, they both came not knowing each other, and yet they came to Australia through mutual friends. They got to know each other, and then they got married without their parents' consent. Don't worry about that. Later on, they got their consent. Yeah, and then a few years on, they had my older sister, so Angela. She's 4 years older than me, and then in 2001 they had me. Um, yeah, so I guess growing up, it's a very not a unique situation, but I think it's a very weird one because I grew up as a Chinese, but in a Western culture. So I got to experience at home. I got to experience the Chinese culture. I got to experience all the things like eating rice, like I don't know, having like Lunar New Year every year, while going to school and experiencing such a westernized culture and people having such different backgrounds. And I think that was interesting because like now growing up, I realize I have a Asian background, but I do tend to feel more Western in a way.
I think that's natural for a lot of us, right? So I was born in Korea, but I came to the States when I was 8, and we
Mm,
are largely influenced by our surroundings, obviously, our friends at school, the TV that we watch, the content and the media that we consume. So it is we're neither nor, but we're both. So it's not. I don't think it's 50-50. neither is it
Oh, for
100.
sure.
It's somewhere in between where we have the ability to be a chameleon almost, blend in
Mm,
and adapt into the situation where necessary. Um, but I think same goes for a lot of our brothers and sisters in Australia, where we're never going to change the color of our skin. We're always going to have black hair, and like it or not, some of the uh, our fellow friends and fellow citizens in our respective countries might feel that we don't have as much right as they do for having been there. Although, as it is in America and Australia's case, it was neither people's land. They took it over, just that
yeah,
they
exactly.
just got there before we did. So
Yeah.
it's a fascinating, often the joke about like, okay, cool. If you're a white American or white Australian, you're probably like sixth, seventh, or eighth generation, whatever you are. We
Mm.
happen to be first or second, so we're still, you know, I don't know. It's interesting that it's just whoever got there first always has to or feels like claiming it. Tell me a little bit more about where you grew up. Is it a diverse community? And you said you resonate with the Western culture a little bit more. Completely understandable, but yet you grew up in a home with people, or I guess parents and a sister. And the food and the culture and the customs are very different. Um,
Mm.
how did you deal with or navigate sort of the early childhood who am I? And did you have a lot of friends going to grade and primary and high school that were of similar cultural background?
Definitely not. Sorry, I went to I went to a very small Catholic school with around maybe 30, 40 people in my year
Wow.
level. And out of those 30, 40 people, there'd be me and another Chinese boy. So there's only two Chinese people in my year level. Um, but that just meant that I got to know the whole school. But even in the whole school, there wasn't that many Chinese people, Asian people in
Mm,
general. Um, So it wasn't a big thing to be Asian in a way. However, me and this other Chinese kid, we really did resonate, and we really did become really close friends. Unfortunately, I lost contact with him, but I think it's really interesting that like it's it's the fact that like we both grew up in similar situations, and yet we could find this thing, even though there were so many other people that we could talk to. Um, But I do think that a part of who I am is, well, someone who is like a social butterfly who likes to um, make sure that everyone's happy. And I think that kind of relates to my situation of like being both Asian, living in a Western culture. Is like, I think we as Asians do think that we need to please everyone and make sure that everyone is happy. And yet I think it's for too long that we've realized that. And so I think right now, out of all times, is a good time to really like put our stamp of approval on things and make sure that our culture really shines through.
I think many people are resonating with you as you're saying those words, Carrie. So you went to a high school with one other Chinese student with whom you didn't really click, and it was a small community. Um,
This
but
was
you,
primary school.
oh,
Yeah.
primary school. Okay, tell me about high
Yes.
school.
Yeah, sure. So high school was a bit more different. So high school, I went from a cohort of around 30 to 40 to around 180, 200.
Mm,
So that's when I got to know more I guess people in general, but I guess
yeah.
Asians as well. And that's where I met some of the other admins as well. So out of the eight admins, I think four or five of us went to the same high school. Um, yes. As
Well,
so then, yeah.
keep going.
Um, so then, yeah. So four out of the eight of us, not including my sister, of course. So she went to the same high school as me. We went to this. So we all did our own things, but we all went to Chinese school together. So we didn't really talk because there was only 180, 200
Hmm.
people on our year level. I didn't really get to talk to them because they were in different classes. And yet, when we went to Chinese school, we would all talk and like have fun. Um, so that's where I could meet. I could uh, experience a lot of even more different cultures.
Yeah.
So the school was really. I was really fortunate enough to go to such a diverse school because we had all these different activities and days that we could do. So we had a specific day called Lote Day, and that was like the international day. And so you would go in, you could choose different activities to do. I remember there was one activity that I did was like origami, and that was like really interesting. And it, um, I don't know, I was like going to my the school that I did. Um, I didn't really appreciate it. Oh no, I did. I didn't really realize how much I would appreciate it
Mm.
going out from high school.
So I think when you know, I am not from Australia, so I don't know. I do think that we have a lot of similarities based on our parents' generation of some of the expectations that are thrown at us or from an early age just
Hmm.
ingrained into us in terms of what we should make of their sacrifice, right? So your parents moved to Australia on their own separately to pursue a better life, and they decided to start a family there. And what is their definition of success for you and your sister?
So my parents, I think they do realize that we live in a Western culture. Therefore, they do realize that we would rather do things that we enjoy, and I do appreciate that because like I'm like at uni and I'm doing what I enjoy, and yet it kind of aligns with what they expect me to do. So I'm really lucky in that sense. Um, but I guess a bit like there has been a lot of conflict between us in how we see eye to eye to how much like effort we should really put in and how much like study we put in um, because they'll be looking at like my cousins and like their friends in China or whatnot and to see like how hard they're putting in the effort because of the difficult opportunity that they're in and they don't get as many opportunities as we do in Australia and yet they see me like I'll be on my phone, I'll be talking to my friends a lot, and that's really how I learn. It's a very different situation. I learn through talking to my friends and really going through the work together, and yet I think it's a bit difficult for them to see that, and yet they still realize that I'm learning in a sense.
I think that's great. I can't. We talk about it on this show quite often, and with most of our guests, all of our guests. It's just this notion that our parents are doing their best to support us in the ways that work for them and make sense to them, right? So,
Yeah.
um, most of our parents grew up in a different decade, a different generation before technology was what we know it to be today, most likely in a country that looks very different, not only from Australia of today and America of today, but both of China and Korea and Vietnam of today.
Mm,
But they are operating from a point of, I know what makes sense. I know what success looks like for me in 1980s China or 1990s Korea. And so I am going to help my kids go follow that same path that worked for us or that we have seen work. I think it's a big challenge too when in a literal foreign land, and I can't imagine at my age, I'm 36 now, like picking up my kids and moving to a whole new country and starting from zero, right? Like it's unimaginable. And the
yeah.
amount of things that our parents collectively in their first immigrant generation really went through is baffling. Just all
Mm,
the kudos in the world to them, right? Because we're weak. We're not as strong as they are. We can't go through half the stuff they did.
for sure.
So it's unimaginable. But even with all that, they had to learn not just a new language, but a new culture while trying to raise kids, while trying to put food on the table. So kudos to the parents. And I think sometimes we get frustrated with some of their, older way of thinking or close-minded as we perceive it. But they just want the best for us, right? And so it is really heartwarming and nice to hear. Of course, parents, regardless of what your background is, parents and kids always going to have conflict between what we want to do and what they want us to do, which is completely okay. So talk to me about the last couple years. What were some of the things? So I mean, so we know about South Asian traits and we know where that ended up, right? And we know what it is
Yeah.
today. And talk to me, maybe so this would have been 2 years from now, like early 2018, right? So
Yes.
you are the right smack in the middle of Gen Z. You were born in 2001. You grew up with the internet.
Yeah.
So this was And so, community within the digital context on Facebook, using the vehicle we now know as memes to display humor and connect with each other are some things that you just grew up with. For some of us older folks, we had to learn it, but it was just so naturally inclined to you. Um, Take me back 2 years or even more than 2 years ago, and um, was there a sense on your end to find community with other like-minded immigrant kids in the Melbourne and Australian community to bond? Were there other communities like that?
So there definitely wasn't any communities like that, and I think we found that subtle Asian trades really made like a online platform for that. But I'll get into that a bit later. Personally, I didn't feel that as if I needed um, to find a new community because I felt so comfortable in the community that I already had. However, I do understand that other people may have felt that as well, like because it's such a because it's so hard to live in a place where obviously like, if you're not comfortable enough and you don't know where to find a community, it's very difficult to go out and find one in the real world. And I think it's so much easier to go online and like really just do a quick Google search on Asian community and um, try to find something. However, I do think that a few years ago it was a bit more difficult um, to get an online space, specifically because the media, social media, is dominated by a more westernized culture, and even not even just social media, but like movies and TV shows. And I think people are now, especially with the whole Crazy Rich Asians kind of whole media finanza, people are now realizing that Asians can really do this, and Asians do need a representation in media. So yeah.
And I think I grew up in LA, went to high school in New York City, and have been in mostly larger American cities. And Melbourne is, one of the largest cities in Australia. It's a big metropolis. Even if you go out to the suburbs, it's still part of that big metropolis area. And um, a lot of those folks too, it's not and like you shared, it's overall a pretty diverse city with a lot of different cultures and representations and different immigrant communities. Um, so we may have had a different resonance or a different observation because, like you, I had my own personal in person network of friends who look like me and restaurants that we could frequent and jokes and stories that we could tell with friends that we had, whether through school or work or just life. Um, so I think it's fascinating because, as you mentioned, you're right. There are millions of people out there who don't have that luxury of growing up in a very populous, diverse, culturally centered, big city. So I think when we talk about digital community, that's the beauty of it, right? So whereas before you would not have been able to connect or at least laugh at the same thing with somebody who lives in the countryside or in some other remote area or outside of America and Australia, some other country where there really isn't a large um, Asian or Asian community. Um, so share with me how subtle Asian traits was formed and how you landed on the name, and give me a little bit of context on. We now know it as the founders that were a group of students, a group of friends. How did you guys vote on things? Was it majority rules, or did somebody just say, "Hey, we're going to call it this," and it is what it is? Tell us a little bit about the group dynamics there.
Yep. So as I said before, 4 out of the 8 of the admins went to my high school, and so we already knew each other before going into Chinese school. And yet, like, because there was 2 classes, and I was in one of the classes, and most of the other admins were in the other class, and so I didn't really get to know them until maybe year 9, year 10. And that's when we all really clicked, and so as Anne said, we all kind of didn't really like Chinese school. I mean, we gave up our Sunday mornings to really do more learning. Like, who would want to do that as a year 9, like year 10, year 8? Anyway, and so we would always muck around. We wouldn't really do that much. And so we would always kind of Facebook message in class because obviously you can't talk in class, but we
Sure.
could always text. And so we had a Facebook Messenger group from that. like a messenger group. And then a few years on, in year 11, year 12 ish, a popular group called sort of Private School Traits came out. And we all
Mm.
went to private school. It sounds a bit prestigious, but it is what it is. um, yeah. And then so it was really interesting to kind of look at the post and like laugh about it because we were part of this minority. And
Mm.
um, although being in a private school was a minority, it was a privilege, and I think a lot of people in on my group didn't realize that. Anywho, the group was titled Private School Traits, and that's where we got the name from. So we were talking one day. We thought, oh, it'd be really funny if we could implement our Asian background in a while
Mm.
in it, because we were talking about like all the little things that our Asian parents do, what we do as Asians, and that we found um, we thought that was unique to us, but we didn't realize that so many other people had connected with it as well. And I guess that's what part of the success was that we just made it a group for like our little friendship group. We added all of our friends. I added my sister, who added all of her 100,
Mm.
200 number of friends, who because she had a bigger friendship kind of group over the years, over the 4 years. Um, Yeah, and then it grew from there. And so I think part of it was that of how the function of Facebook groups work, is where you can't actually see or you can't actually add people to the group. Sorry, you can't uh, tag other people in the group unless they're already in the group. So obviously you have to add all of your friends. But part of it was that it was this cultural thing where people didn't really have a space where they could really laugh about Asian jokes and like look at Asian memes. And I think memes in itself is like the definition of it, I guess, is it's like an inside joke. It's an online inside joke, really, is how I see it. And as you said, that like Asians are like they're a minority in Westernized culture, but we are a kind of majority in the world.
Sure.
Um, and so I guess this inside joke, whatever you want to call it, really resonated with a lot of people. That's I guess that's why we're nearly up to 1.8 million members.
What was the very first thing you guys shared in the group?
What? So the first few posts was made by us, and it was just trying to get it rolling. One of the first things was made by an admin named Tony, and he put when Asians hoard toothpicks at restaurants. So Asians would go to restaurants, they would take all the toothpicks, and I remember, I'd be sitting in the car with my dad. My dad would just take out his toothpick. I'm like, "Where did you get that from?" He's like, "Yeah, I just took it." It was just the thing, like, I grew up and, like, I would go to like, even me now, like, I'd go to hotels and whatnot, and I'd take all the shampoos because that's what I would do, and now
Yeah.
in our bathroom, we have all these shampoos, and I don't feel bad about it.
It's that though, right? Because it's one of these things where I beyond the memes and beyond the funny, I think what your group has really done for an entire generation of people is to give permission to feel the way that they feel. That the things that we thought were unique to our moms or just Korean moms or any smaller subset, you go and you're like, wait a minute, Vietnamese moms do that too? And you're like, holy shit, like Chinese dad. I'm like, and it's, yeah, there are certain unique characteristics by culture and by language and by country, but by and large, there's just more things that unite us than separate us.
Mm,
I mean, sure, if we go into history or whatever, we're probably one part of one big clan, and then humans got silly and fought each other and drew lines in the sand, and that's how borders are formed, right? Like borders are not natural, they're man-made. So, before the wars and before all the crazy stuff, like we all came generally from the same things, and genes have memory, and we are all sort of in the same cultural mindset, or just and I think a lot of the things that we sometimes unfairly critique our parents for is going back to where what their context is, right? Like overall, they grew up poorer than we did. They grew up in war. They grew up in communism. They grew up in famine. Um, they were refugees. They were separated. All sorts of crazy stuff. So like, part of a lot of the things that I think we now, not laugh at, but laugh about, are things born out of survival. You know, it's it's not the toothpick, but it's just take what you can when you can, because you don't know when that's going to come next, and that's sort of the real sort of the impetus, or the root of that behavior. Um, you know, uh, in Korean, it's not eat well, right? Maybe it's we eat well now, but for a long time when I was growing up, it's eat a lot. They would tell us to eat a lot because my grandparents, they grew up in an era where you literally didn't know where your next meal was going to come from. So, you know, perhaps we can laugh about it now and like be like, oh, like that's how kids got chunky or got fat or, gain weight. But part of it is just the context of understanding. And I think what the group has also done from that regard, from a mental health perspective, is to give light and perspective to why, instead, of course, you laugh at it, you enjoy about it, and then you discuss about it. But then for some, they take it to the next level and go, why was this a thing? Right? Like, why would my parents and my grandparents and aunties and uncles have behaved this way? And then I think that's the real benefit that you guys are providing to the community and to the world, really, is to have these discussions and thoughtful things about. I just thought my mom was weird, but if I think about it a lot and I talk to my friends and there's this community that I belong to, and it's like, oh, that's why it makes sense, right? And so I think it's really uh, the actual literal definition of a community, to share something and then to really enjoy it together. Um, I want to get from your perspective and what your mindset was going through the first 90 days of the group's creation. So there you are in Chinese school, you're Facebook messaging a bunch of friends, and you're like, okay, teacher's annoying. Let's slack off and daydream, and so you're like, all right, F it. We're gonna make a Facebook group. We're gonna call it Subtle Agent Traits. You start inviting. Angela's got a couple hundred friends in there. You've got a couple hundred friends in there. So does Ann and everybody else. Um, when was the first moment that you had a holy crap moment?
Well, how in I'm not sure in Korean culture, but in our culture specifically, 8 is a lucky number.
Mm.
So how we would track our progress was the number 8. So first it was 8,888. We were like, okay, good. This is good. We need to screenshot this. And then it reached to 88,888 in like a few days later. And we were like, whoa, we grew from like 8,888 to 88,000. And then it grew to 888,888. And we were blown away. This was around November, maybe. I'm not
Mhm.
sure that's timestamp, or October, something like that. But it was it was really interesting because we grew at such like an exponential amount in such a short amount of
Yeah.
time. And we had at that time we hadn't realized how phenomenal that was. Now we realize that it's one of the biggest one I
Right.
say one of the biggest, but I'm not sure. One of the
It's
biggest
up there.
Facebook groups out there. It's
Yep.
out there. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and then so between these 90 days, between from September to the end of the year, we grew we hit our million point really quickly, and soon after that 1.5. um and I guess the first kind of moment we realized it was really big um was when it hit Sydney. It
Mm.
doesn't seem that big, but like to hit Sydney, we thought, oh wow, like we have absolutely like we have near to no contact with Sydney, and yet all these people from Sydney are joining. Like, how is this possible? And then the next one was obviously around the world. So when it hit New York, when it hit LA, we thought, okay, we've done it.
What were some of the earlier discussions on the goals of the group, or the vision or mission of the group, as you guys decide or observe that it was starting to gain traction?
Mhm. So from the start, I'll talk a little bit about the Facebook groups, how it works. So we have set up from the start a thing called pending posts. And how that works is people in the group would have to submit posts, and then we, as admins or moderators, will have to approve or decline that post. Um, little did we know that right now we have around 45,000 pending posts.
Wow.
However, it was just a way to keep our group authentic and to make sure that the most relevant or the most, I guess, funny content um, on was in the group, was seen in the group. And that was one of the things that we had to make sure, going through and making sure that our group was successful, was to make sure that our content was relevant. And one of the biggest things, one of the biggest rules that we had was obviously being Asian, but another thing was being funny, and another thing was that we really try to enforce is if this post will do good, if this post will make things funny, if this post will make sure that there's no othering, in a
Mm,
sense, where like it would all the like there would be a post, maybe it would feel to be like a Caucasian person versus an Asian person. Like, although we are trying to reinforce that Asian people are good in a way, we don't really want to say that Western culture is bad, in a sense. And I
sure.
guess that's one of
It's
the
not
reasons
about that.
why
Yeah.
we change. Yeah, we changed the rules from only Asians are allowed to everyone's allowed, as long as you connect with it, as long as you understand um, where we are coming from. And I remember my sister talking, and she was talking to her friend, and they were laughing and joking about salvation traits. And then her friend who isn't Asian, she was like, I think she's Italian. I'm not sure. She was saying, "Oh yeah, my grandma does that too. Like my grandma, like likes to give me food. My grandma like likes to give me all these things, make sure that I'm well fed, make sure I'm like well dressed or whatever." And it really like puts into perspective that like these kind of minute like culture traits, whatever you want to call it, isn't just Asian specific. It's really like the world specific.
I think it's yeah, it's humanity, right? Like grandmas love us, and their love language
Yeah,
was food, right? Like
yeah.
and parents sacrifice for their kids, and it's protectionism. It's just there's a slight context I think obviously hits harder and home because a lot of it is food based, a lot of it is custom based. Let's get in your mind and sort of the let's nerd out for a little bit and talk about the
Yes.
mechanics of the group. Who gets to decide what's funny? And tell me what it was like when it was the eight of you, because you just shared with us how you guys decide what gets through. Now, with approaching 1,000,000.8, with 40 some odd moderators who all have equal ability to yes or no a post, what are some guidelines that were in place 18 months ago when it was just the eight of you? And how has that evolved as the group has gotten bigger and you had to bring in more people to help manage the group?
hmm So I guess from the start, it was a bit more easier because content was out there. Like you could really write whatever you want, and as long as it was related to being Asian, and people would approve it. Um, I guess as the time goes on, content gets a bit more scarce, and people do uh, lean less from your background as growing up, and more in the pop culture, really, and like seeing what's going on around the world, and like posting about that and seeing what's funny about it. And I think like we do get a lot of posts about like coronavirus with COVID-19. We do get a lot of posts about other like things that are going on around in the world. But I guess what has changed, what would be the amount of posts that we had to go through. And I guess that's where all the moderators come in from. Like it doesn't matter how funny your post is, if we don't see it in time, it's a bit it really goes into the air.
Sure.
So that's why we try to get as many of our friends, because we knew them personally, to help out. And so became the first moderators. And then we realized, oh, we need more diverse people, because we all went to Chinese school. We're all Chinese,
Mm,
and yet we wouldn't understand the Korean jokes, the Vietnamese jokes, the Indian jokes, like
yeah.
all these different jokes. We couldn't understand, not because that we didn't want to, but because we didn't grow up in that specific background. And so we started to ask all these different other friends of friends, people online that we kind of knew that had different backgrounds. Um, that was the first kind of asking of the mods to come in. And then the second time that we recruited all these different mods was internationally. So we realized that in Australia, it's only in one specific time
Mm,
that we can really approve posts.
right.
We had to ask people from around the world, and although we felt less comfortable doing that because we didn't know these people, they were complete randoms to us. We still had to enforce a little bit of our trust into these moderators to be able to approve specific type of posts that we do want. And the recruitment, I would say recruitment process, but it's rather just like an interview, not interview, sorry. It's a conversation. And then we do try to tell them what we do expect and
Mm.
what we do want from them and what we do, the specific guidelines to what we claim as funny. Um, and they understand that. Like they just, every day, like even us as admins and moderators, we appreciate our position, um, having this impact, and yet we are completely no ones in a way. Yeah, so we have around 40 to 50 moderators from around the world. And it's really interesting because the other day we had a Zoom call with maybe around 20 odd of them.
Mm.
And it was really interesting to hear everyone's perspective of what's going on in um, around their area around COVID-19. And everyone's pretty much the same. Everyone's stuck at home doing absolutely nothing. So I guess that kind of makes us feel better.
I think there's a lot of business and leadership lessons in the story that you just shared. And maybe you guys did it intentionally, or maybe in hindsight, it's like, holy crap, that was really brilliant. Um, you had a product as a business that became wildly popular. And sometimes companies go through this where, through their explosive growth, they have to add headcount quite a bit very quickly. And one of the most challenging things for businesses or any organizations to maintain in a time of massive growth is culture. Because with 8 people who have history with each other, who have similar backgrounds, it's really easy to maintain culture. And even that, I wouldn't say it's easy, it's easier. But
Yeah.
as you expand it to, and you grew because of strategy, right? You needed other people who saw things that you didn't see. So there's
Yep.
humility there, right? You can't do everything right. So you have to hire for the roles that you're not good at. So you brought in, for lack of a better term, culture experts who could help you decipher what's funny and relevant from different lenses. Um, you are a global entity. So you brought in people from other sides of the world that could help you maintain operational capability 24 hours a day and in different time zones. And you set up a structure to help and train those people to decide what you guys, and to the best of their ability, to help maintain the ethos and the culture that the 8 of you had built. So
Yep.
maybe you guys did this intentionally and you guys are just, savants and geniuses that will take over the world one day, or you just did what you thought was necessary. And as it is in business and as it is in life, it's just, if you do the right thing to maintain the culture and take care of the people, everything else, you weren't trying to hack it, right? Is, I guess, my point. There wasn't a deliberate plan to do it so that you can grow to 1.8. I would venture to say that if somebody started a group today, in whatever form, funny, culturally relevant, um, they're not going to be able to duplicate your success and your exponential growth, in any form, because I just think it's also the organic nature of the way that your group grew, which really led to uh, your popularity. Um, so you said you got to 1 million pretty quickly, and it's been growing. I mean, relatively speaking, you're like, oh, you got to 1 million in the first 3 months, and it's only been 800,000 in the last 15. Forget about all that. It's still crazy, right? Like, you go through
Yeah.
the group, and you're like, wait a minute, this post has like 30,000 likes. That's insane. Which means 500,000 people saw it, right? Based on the impressions versus likes, and then you guys are seeing all this data on the back end, right? Like, just the engagement levels are through the roof, and the global impact that it has had. I'm pretty sure people have met and started relationships from their group. I'm sure people have gotten together and potentially started projects and businesses and connected with each other. As mentioned in a different show, um, your show has actually helped create Asian Create, or I'm sorry, your group, um, has impacted other groups and has been the brainchild and the inspiration for what I think is we're just at the tip of the iceberg, and myself too, in wanting to create more communities of people that are like-minded but have a particular focus, whether it be, in a professional field or in an interest group or by a geography. And I think people look to subtle Asian traits as the thing that really helped give people permission to the things that we didn't even know we wanted in our lives, right? And timing was also important because it was right around that time that the overlords at Facebook decided to push groups, right?
Yes.
It was good timing because engagement was going down, right? They bought Instagram, but they were losing the younger audience. And so this is another business case. Older people were starting to share pictures of their kids and their puppies and all that stuff. And a few years ago, I think there was some concerns about engagement. How do we keep people on the platform longer, more often? And so they started pushing groups. And so you got in at the right time. And just as good fortune would have it, they were pushing groups probably inorganically through the feeds, right? And so um, that I think is one of the coolest things that most people don't know about sort of your behind the story of just understanding. Yes, it was a cultural revolution or a group phenomenon. It's amazing, but it was also just good timing and knowing when to do what. Right? It's if you started a Facebook group 5 years ago, it wouldn't have happened, and if you started it
Yeah.
today, it wouldn't have happened because it's too late and too early. Um, since starting the group, Carrie, what has been the coolest thing that you've got to experience personally?
Right. So starting the group, it was 2 years ago, and that was when I was still 17. And you as Americans probably think, "Wow, he's so young," and yet like us in Australia as well, like being an adult, you're counted if you're 18, and yet so I was still a minor back then. Um, so once we reached 1 million people, um, I was still 17 at that point. So it 100% really forced me to grow up really quickly.
Mm,
Um, and yet, when I think June, July came around, Facebook contacted us directly and
wow.
was like, it would be great if one of the admins could come to California to give a talk and to give an international presentation about your group and what your group stands for and how your group became so popular. Um, So our first thought was, great, let's send Angela. Because all of us had it was during exam period. Everyone had exams, everyone had to study, and so we thought, okay, well, we kind of have to send Angela. But Angela couldn't go because she had work. And so because currently I'm studying engineering and architecture. So architecture, I don't have any exams. I just have a folio due, which meant during the time that the, the conference was going to be gone, I technically, um, I think the others had also. I'm not sure, but I, for one, didn't have any exams during that period. I had it afterwards, but don't worry about it. I like perfectly. I had the right time to go, so I got sent over by myself. I was 18 at this point, and yet I was only what 4 5 months into being 18. I was flying all the way to California, Facebook, by myself, um, to talk in front of all these people. And I want to try to sound humbling, but it's such an experience that I kind of can't. Um, so the first talk was in front of 60 international media companies. And that was just to kind of gauge what groups is all about because
Mm,
it's a relatively new concept and
yeah.
a relatively new feature that Facebook's trying to implement. So they were trying to say, wow, like these are all the good things, these are all the good things that's come out of it. Um, and then the next kind of mini interview that we did was me um, and 10, 11 other Asian media companies. And they really wanted to get into the um, more details of how
Mm,
the group started and like why the group started and really um, it was a big experience, let's just say, because it really put me especially into perspective of how big the group has gone and talking to and talking to all the Facebook people, like they they were really appreciative, even though it was kind of their job. They were really appreciative of how much more kind of content and how much more, as you said, what do you, sorry, what's the word again? How much more?
Traffic you've generated for them,
Yeah, that's the
money
one.
you've generated for them, all the other above.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and yet they were still trying to push the idea that we are a cultural phenomenon. Like
Sure.
they,
I think it is. I
um,
would have to agree with that.
yeah, for sure. Um, yeah.
What kind of conversations did you have with Facebook staff up there in terms of, obviously there may have been a desire to learn sort of a playbook from your end of how do we then encourage other people to create massive movements on Facebook, and
Mm,
because it lives on their platform, obviously people are less likely to cancel their accounts or to move off the platform. And this, if I time it right, it was around the time there's a lot of questions about data privacy, and especially
yes.
on the US side of post election, all these things that were giving them negative press. So I imagine that they wanted to get as much information or as insight from you as how do we create 10 subtlety traits in different parts of the world and different subsets so that we keep people here on our platform. What were some of the conversations that you had, and what did you learn from visiting here?
Yeah. So they didn't send me over for nothing. Like, although I was representing Facebook groups, they did want to kind of learn face to face of how they could grow Facebook groups. So I think their idea wasn't how do we create 10 more other sublimation traits, but rather how can we as a company, as a technology, facilitate other groups to become that big. And so we had a lot of conversation back and forth of what we had problems with the app,
Mm,
and both on the PC and on the iPhone, sorry, on the phone, and the different problems that we had technology wise, so that they could really facilitate that. They could engineer that somehow so that it was more easier for us to kind of work through. And one of the biggest things that we had a problem with, which was a big thorn in our side, was the fact that on your computer you can approve posts chronologically and
mhm.
also from newest. So let's say someone posted it from 10 days ago. On your PC, you would be able to see that, and you would only be able to see someone who posted it 5 minutes ago. And yet on your phone, you wouldn't be able to do that. You would only be able to see the newest.
Ah,
Um, and so that was one of the biggest things that we had problems with. And it only maybe last month, a few weeks ago, they implemented that system on our phone. And once we had that, everyone was celebrating because everyone's on their phone. Like you have your phone in
right,
your pocket all the time.
right.
Like you can pull it up, but you don't have your laptop with you all the time.
Sure, and there's still some functionalities of groups that are different from the browser versus the mobile. That as a manager of Facebook groups myself, that just drive me nuts. But
Yeah,
we just have to hope that they'll, it's a learning process for them as well, right?
yeah.
So, Carrie, if someone is listening to this interview, you are one of the founders of the greatest movements in digital community. Period. You've been invited, and as humble as you're being, at 18, to speak to a bunch of adults at one of the biggest brands in the world, to be flown over there and to be learned from and to share ideas with. Um, has there been anything in that experience that has gotten you curious or more interested in doing something like this, or continuing on the subtle Asian traits legacy or brand as more than group of 8 friends who created a place for the world to connect?
Yep. Firstly, I'd just like to add that like a big part of why Facebook was so interested in our group was that we are like a really big group. Um, so they never had someone like any group that has. Well, they probably have, but um, it's a bit difficult because for their algorithm, they're more suited for more smaller groups, like
Hmm.
10, 20
Yeah,
people, and yet they've never had some group that had like what nearly 1.8 million members, and so they have to really tailor to both ends. Um, I guess something that I really brought home and I really really took in was um I guess the fact that I can go to uni right now, I can go to different places in real life and join all these different communities and really discover, like, it might be, or it could also be through the internet as well, that I can be able to discover these real life situations, these real life communities. But then, so us as Silation Traits, like as our admins, we are trying to get people more offline, and not so trying to
Mm,
more offline, but try to connect more communities offline. I mean,
right.
and try to get people to really start talking. And I guess it's a bit difficult in this
Now,
situation.
yeah.
Yeah. But I guess it's a start where people do weirdly feel more comfortable online, and not having to commit to directly being face to face.
Sure.
And I think that's a good start.
What kind of advice would you have for, regardless of age, but somebody who might be listening, who wants to, in their own way, maybe they're in a profession where they don't have a community of like minded people who look like them, or maybe it's within a school. If somebody wants to build a digital community today, what are some lessons that you would share with them to make sure that that group is as authentic, organic, and as engaging as something that you've created?
Hmm. I think stick to your roots and stick to what you believe in. I think no one's really going to listen to you unless you really listen to yourself, I guess. Um, it's a big thing where you have to really understand why your community exists and what purpose it's for. Like, I guess if you started a group that someone else had already started, there's no real point. But I guess if you really have your own identity of what the group is, of what the community is about, and why it exists, I think people will tend to really resonate with that.
Mm,
And it's like, just because you're part of one community doesn't mean you can't be a part of another one.
right.
Like, you can really, like, people do realize that. Oh, are you still there? Okay. People
Mhm.
do realize that it's such a big world.
Yeah.
Um, I forget how many different connections I have now, that not even me being a satellite trade admin, but I will be able to talk to different people from school, from uni, from work, um, and it's really people. I guess, yeah, just be authentic. Be authentically yourself.
What conversations have you and your sister had with your parents? Do they know? I guess they knew. They have to know now. You left home to go to California for this. When did they know that it was a big deal? How did you have to share with them how big of a deal that actually was, and what are their thoughts on this thing that you created?
Yeah, so every time we talk to them about it, they'll do the parents thing, and they will always lecture us one way or another. Um, so I don't know, we'll show them a meme, we'll show them a funny video, and they'll do the classic haha, but who's that? Is that your friend? It's a bit obviously there's technology differences, and they would much prefer to use WeChat over Facebook, but
Sure.
I do think they realize that it's kind of our thing, that we have grown ourselves. They don't really, they try to kind of tell us what we should be doing, but we don't really listen to them because we're doing our own thing. The
Sure.
things about what we should approve, what we should decline, that kind of thing. They have their own mentality of what they think is relevant and what they think should be going out to the world. But we kind of want things to just be lighthearted, for things to be funny. So I guess there's that difference in that. But we both do understand each other.
So you've been covered in the New York Times, the New Yorker, and a whole bunch of other just top of the line and world renowned, world class publications about the creation that you have been a part of. Um, Parents may not read those things. Parents may not even know what those things are. Um, has the local or more broad Chinese media covered you guys, and was that a point where they're reaction was a little bit different than you telling them that you guys were in the New York Times?
Um, I get well, because the New York Times was around about the same time that I went to Facebook, and
Mm.
so it was really like the peak of like when everything was going on. Um, we've got because we are more predominantly like a Western Asian culture,
English
Facebook
based.
group.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a bit difficult for these international companies to really reach out to us. We have done a few interviews with like SBS,
Mm.
but nothing really um, too Asian in a
Okay.
way.
That makes sense. No, I think that's great. But it's you've gone to the places where your audience is, right? So you've been in the largest and the most prominent English language publications, both traditional and new media, like our friend Benny's Next Shark, and have gotten the millions of views through his network. And what an amazing thing that he's built too, right? Like just
Absolutely.
um, and I've been lucky to see it from the ground up, and seeing it's wild, and it's so encouraging. Many of our guests that we've had on the show are in the same boat as you and Anne and Angela and everybody else, and anywhere. Just in the last 3 or 4 years, the amount of community, not just a number, but just the uh, impact and just the uh, energy behind these things to connect, to finally share, yes, funny haha stuff, but also finally find a home for us in wherever you may be. In many cases, as we started the show with, where we often feel left out, whether we feel like we don't belong, and especially in these challenging times of, COVID-19 related stupid racism and hate crimes and all this stuff. Um, like it's crazy. It's wild and it's crazy, but it is really really heartwarming to know that there is a place, and even though it might have almost 2 million people in it, that people can join the group freely, share things, react to things together, and just maybe for a moment or so, just to really feel like they are not alone, that they do belong. And we talked about the word minority. Um, it's only relative to the countries that you're in.
Mhm. Yep.
If we take every single Asian person, we're like a third of the world. That's not a
Yeah.
minority, right? Foreign is also a relative concept. You go back home, you're not foreign. Um, so, unfortunately, we are constantly bombarded with messages to make us feel less than, to make us feel out of place, to make us feel that we don't belong. But if we step back and look at the globe as an entire community, and thanks to people, or I guess thanks to companies like Facebook, who um, are they perfect? No. But what they have created is the ability for people, like you and me and everybody else, to connect, to laugh at the same things, to bond. And more good has come out of that than not. So, um, thanks, Carrie. As somebody who probably is out of your general age demographic, of the people who are creating and laughing at the memes, I will tell you, it brings me so much joy, because I speak for many in my generation, because it's some things that we look at what's going on now, and it's, if we had that, if we had that when we were growing up, a support system, a place to connect, a place to feel a little slightly less out of place. Um, what could we have done differently in our lives? What choices could we have made differently in terms of academic and career pursuits? So, at the tender age of 36, I'm starting this podcast to do a little bit of that, not only for my generation, but for yours, and more importantly, for my kids, who are 3 and 1. So, hopefully, by the time they grow up and can listen to a podcast and figure out, what the heck did dad do in 2020. Um, we're all playing our small role, and big thanks to guys like you, uh, to make sure that everybody who looks like us, or every human being in general, never feels alone, that feels connected, and take that box of toothpicks home, right? Take the hotel shampoo. So, Carrie, want to end the show in the same that we end all of our shows, and it is in the form of a letter. back to the greater Asian community at large. And so share with us whatever you want to share. Share with us what you might want to say to a younger version of Kerry, or perhaps somebody who's feeling a little bit lost and wants to find a home in some sort of a community. So if you'd help me finish out the show and finish the letter, dear Asians.
So, dear Asians, I think now of all times, it's everyone's a bit unweary of what's going on. So, I do think forget about all the bad news, forget about all the the cases of how many blah 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 people have gotten in your in your country, whatever. Think about the opportunities you can have right now, and I think a lot of companies and a lot of different communities or whatnot are going online because they have to, but I think it's a great opportunity for people to reach out online, and I think it's um, because we live in a world where your phone is next to your pocket at all times. You have access to internet, and so you really utilize that and really get to know how your technology works, how it works for you, and really bring home why you really do want to kind of what you really want to do in your life, and really, I guess for me, like well, how many years ago, like blah blah blah, when I was younger, you don't really need to really worry about what's going on in the world, what's really happening in your life. Just really live it. But I guess now as an adult, I mean, I don't have much credibility being an adult. I'm only 1 year into being an adult. Well, I guess for you being in America, I'm yet an adult. But I guess really remember back in the times when you were a kid and when times were easier and you didn't really have much cares. And really take some of that idea and really bring it into your life right now.
Thanks for sharing that, Carrie. And if you're listening to this and you think that your age, your race, your location in the world should stop you and give you doubt and give people the ability to tell you, no, you can't, throw that away right now. A bunch of 17-year-old students, half a world away, created something that has changed an entire generation, that continues to change, and all for the positive, to create a place where we can commune and to laugh at and to connect. But also, how many subtle Asian X groups are we seeing? You guys have created a movement. And as I share this with Anne and I share this with other folks, if you can, when you can, often pause, step back, and just marvel and appreciate the thing from an objective way. Because at a certain point, it's not an opinion. You built this thing, the data backs it up, the numbers back it up, and the stories that I'm sure you get from the impact that your crazy idea, because you were bored in Chinese school and wanted to just funny haha, it's really created a good positive impact in the world. So be proud of that. And whatever you end up doing for the rest of your life, this will always be a part of your legacy. This will always be something that the eight of you get to take on wherever you go. And so, on behalf of everybody, not just the 1.8, but the countless other people who've been impacted by your crazy decision 18 months ago, Carrie, thank you. And may you continue to shape the world. And you might want to change the name because it's not so subtle anymore. And Asians never have been subtle. And we need to be loud and we need to be vocal and we need to change the world for the better. So thank you, Carrie.
Thank you. I had so much fun.
All she wanna do is love her.